The observation deck of the Galactic Council's flagship hummed with nervous energy as Admiral Zexthara watched the tactical display with growing unease. Her forearms moved in quick, jerky motions across the holographic controls, each gesture betraying the anxiety that her species typically kept hidden behind their crystalline facial masks. The Velkari were known throughout the galaxy for their calm, calculating nature, but today even she felt the tremors of fear running through her exoskeleton. "Status report," she commanded, her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that made her words sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Commander Yulrath, a hulking Gornaki with skin like polished obsidian, stepped forward. His massive frame cast shadows across the holographic display as he spoke. "The Devourers have broken through the outer defensive line at Kepler 438b, the Centauri Defense Fleet. They're gone, Admiral, all 2,000 ships." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Zexthara's mandibles clicked together in the Velkari equivalent of grinding teeth. 2,000 ships, each carrying crews of hundreds, gone in less than 6 hours. The Devourers lived up to their name, consuming everything in their path with a hunger that seemed to transcend mere biological need. "What about the evacuation?" she asked, though she already knew the answer from the grim set of Yulrath's shoulders. "Minimal success. Perhaps 3% of the civilian population made it off-world before." He paused, his deep voice faltering. "Before the harvesting began." Across the deck, various species from the Galactic Council stood in stunned silence. The elegant Sirnathi with their flowing, ethereal forms seemed to ripple like disturbed water. The mechanical Tekhani processed the data with their usual efficiency, but even their optical sensors dimmed with what could only be called sorrow. The furry Morin huddled together, their large ears flattened against their heads in distress. For 300 years, the Galactic Council had maintained peace through careful diplomacy and strategic alliances. Wars were fought with economic sanctions and political maneuvering. When conflicts did arise, they were settled through technological superiority and tactical precision. The galaxy had known order. Then the Devourers arrived. They came from beyond the galactic rim, ships that looked more grown than built, organic curves and pulsing veins running along hulls that seemed to breathe. Their technology was unlike anything the Council had encountered, not based on physics as understood by galactic civilization, but on something far more primal and terrifying. "Admiral," came a voice from behind her. Zexthara turned to see Captain Morden of the Altarian Republic, his blue-scaled face etched with concern. "The Council is requesting an emergency session. The Devourers are moving toward the core systems, if they take Proxima Prima." "I know," Zexthara replied curtly. Proxima Prima was the heart of galactic civilization, home to over 40 billion souls from dozens of species. Its loss would be more than strategic. It would be the end of everything they had built. The emergency session convened within the hour. The Great Council Chamber, a massive sphere where representatives from 57 species floated in their preferred atmospheric conditions, buzzed with panic barely contained by diplomatic protocol. Zexthara watched as world after world reported the same story. The Devourers' advance was relentless, unstoppable. "The hegemony fleets at Vega couldn't slow them down," reported the insected Ambassador Clichter, her compound eyes reflecting the horror of what she had witnessed. "They didn't just destroy our ships, they absorbed them. The energy signatures suggested our own weapons were somehow turned against us." "The situation is untenable," declared High Counselor Velmoth, his ancient form barely visible within the swirling energy field that kept him alive. "We must consider surrender terms." The word hit the chamber like a shockwave. Surrender. The Galactic Council, which had never known defeat, was contemplating capitulation to an enemy they barely understood. "What terms?" Ambassador Thesara of the Serpentine Alliance hissed, her scaled coils writhing in agitation. "They don't negotiate, they consume. There are no survivors from the worlds they've taken." It was then that the chamber's attention was drawn to a small section that had remained oddly quiet throughout the proceedings. The human delegation, a species so young they'd only joined the Council 50 years ago, sat in their simple atmospheric bubble. 3 representatives who seemed almost primitive compared to the advanced beings around them. Ambassador Sarah Chen stood up slowly, her plain features unremarkable by galactic standards. Humans were an oddity in the Council, a species that had achieved faster-than-light travel through what most considered crude, brute force engineering rather than elegant scientific advancement. They were tolerated rather than respected, seen as useful but ultimately limited by their biological constraints and short lifespans. The human delegation requests permission to address the council, Chen said, her voice carrying clearly through the translation matrix. A few counselors exchanged glances. What could this young species possibly contribute to a crisis that had already claimed entire star systems? Permission granted, High Counselor Velmoth replied, though his tone suggested it was more out of courtesy than any real interest. Chen stepped forward to the central speaking platform. Honored counselors, we understand the gravity of this situation. The Devourers represent an existential threat to all galactic civilization. However, we believe surrender is premature. A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through parts of the chamber. Here was a species barely 50 years removed from its first contact with galactic civilization, suggesting that surrender to an unstoppable force was premature. With respect, interjected Counselor Vexini of the Quantum Collective, his crystalline form pulsing with contained energy. The human fleet consists of fewer than 200 vessels. What possible contribution could you make that our combined forces of over 10,000 ships could not? Chen's expression didn't change, but there was something in her eyes that Admiral Zexthara found oddly unsettling. Counselor, you're thinking about this the wrong way. You're all thinking about this the wrong way. Explain, commanded High Counselor Velmoth. Every battle you've fought against the Devourers has been defensive. You've tried to protect worlds, hold positions, maintain formations. You fought like civilized beings trying to preserve what you've built. Chen paused, and in that moment, something shifted in her demeanor. But humans learned a long time ago that sometimes civilization is a luxury you can't afford. The chamber fell silent. There was something in the human's tone that spoke of experiences none of the other species could quite understand. We've studied your combat records, Chen continued. The Devourers adapt to your tactics because your tactics are predictable. You fight to minimize casualties, to preserve infrastructure, to maintain some semblance of order even in battle. These are admirable goals, but they're also limitations. Admiral Zexthara leaned forward in her command position. What are you proposing? We're not proposing anything, said the second human representative, General Marcus Webb. His scarred face and cybernetic arm spoke of a lifetime of conflict that most galactic species had evolved past. We're volunteering. Volunteering for what? Demanded Ambassador Thisara. The third human, Dr. Elena Vasquez, stood up. Her appearance was deceptively mild, a middle-aged woman who looked more like a scientist than a warrior. To show the Devourers something they haven't encountered yet. To show them why, throughout human history, the most dangerous thing you could do was back us into a corner with no way out. High Counselor Velmoth's energy field flickered. You speak of warfare as if you have unique experience in it. General Webb's laugh was harsh, lacking any humor. Counselor, with all due respect, humanity has been at war for its entire recorded history. We've fought each other, our environment, disease, starvation, extinction events. We've survived ice ages and asteroid impacts. We've developed over 40,000 different ways to kill each other and refined them across millennia of constant conflict. Dr. Vasquez activated a holographic display that showed human history, not the sanitized version typically presented to the Council, but the raw, brutal reality of it. Wars that lasted decades, battles where victory came at costs that would horrify other species, conflicts where the only options were victory or complete extinction. We understand something that your peaceful civilizations have forgotten, Dr. Vasquez said quietly. Sometimes, the only way to save what you love is to be willing to destroy everything. The chamber was utterly silent now. The images floating above them showed a species that had clawed its way to the stars not through enlightenment, but through an evolutionary gauntlet that had forged them in fires other species couldn't imagine. You're talking about total war, Admiral Zexthara said, her voice barely above a whisper. We're talking about survival, Ambassador Chen replied. The Devourers think they understand warfare because they've seen your civilized battles. They think they know what sentient species are capable of. They're wrong. General Webb stepped forward, his cybernetic implants gleaming under the chamber's lights. Give us operational command of the defense of Proxima Prima. Let us show these things what happens when you threaten humanity's pack. Pack, questioned Counselor Vexini. All of you, Dr. Vasquez explained. Humanity doesn't just fight for itself. When we adopt someone into our pack, we'll burn the universe down before we let them be harmed. You became our pack the moment you accepted us into the council. High Counselor Velmoth's ancient form seemed to consider this for a long moment. The risks. The risks of letting us try are minimal compared to the certainty of extinction if we surrender, Chen interrupted. Counselor, you've seen how we build our ships. Crude, you call them. Inelegant, primitive. She activated another display showing human vessel schematics. Where other species built sleek, efficient ships optimized for speed and energy conservation, human ships were different. They were built like weapons themselves, angular, redundant, bristling with systems that seemed almost aggressive in their design. We don't build ships to explore the cosmos, General Webb said. We build them to survive when everything goes wrong. Every human vessel is designed with the assumption that it will take massive damage and keep fighting. But more than that, Dr. Vasquez added, we build them with something you've never needed to consider. We build them to ram. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. In galactic civilization, ramming was considered an accident, a failure of navigation or technology. No civilized species intentionally destroyed their own ships by crashing them into enemies. Humans have a saying, Ambassador Chen said, her voice carrying a weight that seemed to press down on the entire chamber. If you're going through hell, keep going. The Devourers think they're bringing hell to us. They don't understand that we've lived in hell so long, we call it home. Admiral Zexthara found herself staring at the human delegation with a mixture of fascination and horror. These beings, these creatures who looked so similar to dozens of other humanoid species, carried within them something that the rest of the galaxy had never developed, a capacity for violence so refined, so absolute, that it had become an art form. What guarantees do we have that you can succeed where our fleets have failed? High Counselor Velmoth asked. General Webb's smile was predatory. None, but we guarantee that if we fail, we'll fail so spectacularly that the Devourers will remember it. We'll make them pay a price so high that they'll think twice before threatening anyone else. The vote was closer than it should have been. Fear of the unknown, fear of unleashing something that might be worse than the Devourers themselves, almost carried the day. But in the end, desperation won. The human delegation was given operational command of the Proxima Prima Defense Fleet. As the council session ended and representatives began filing out, Admiral Zexthara found herself approaching the human delegation. Ambassador Chen, she called out. The human woman turned, her expression calm but alert. Admiral. This strategy you're proposing, are you certain your species can bear the cost? War of the type you're describing. It changes those who fight it. Chen's smile was sad but determined. Admiral, we've been paying that cost for millions of years. The difference now is that we're finally fighting for something worth the price. As Zexthara walked away, she found herself wondering if the galaxy had just made a terrible mistake. The humans spoke of war as if it were breathing, natural, and inevitable. They talked about destruction with the same casual tone other species used to discuss art or philosophy. But perhaps that was exactly what the galaxy needed now. Perhaps, after 300 years of peace, they needed to remember that sometimes survival required embracing the monster within. The Devourers were coming, and for the first time since their arrival, Admiral Zexthara felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Dark, terrible hope, but hope nonetheless. Humanity was going to war, and the universe was about to remember why apex predators didn't negotiate with their prey. The preparation began immediately. Within hours of the Council's decision, human ships began arriving at Proxima Prima through fold space jumps that seemed almost violent compared to the gentle transitions other species used. Each vessel emerged from hyperspace like a bullet fired from a gun, engines blazing, weapons already powered and scanning for threats. Admiral Zexthara watched from the observation deck of her flagship as the human fleet assembled. She had expected perhaps 50 vessels. The humans had claimed fewer than 200 ships total, and surely they wouldn't risk their entire military for one battle, no matter how crucial. She was wrong. 237 ships materialized in Proxima Prima's outer system over the course of 6 hours. Every single human military vessel, from massive dreadnoughts to tiny patrol boats, had answered the call. But more than that, civilian ships kept arriving: cargo haulers, mining vessels, research ships, even luxury liners. Each one had been hastily retrofitted with whatever weapons and armor their crews could manage. "They're bringing their entire civilization to this fight," observed Commander Yulrath, his obsidian features reflecting confusion. "Even their non-combatants are volunteering for what amounts to a suicide mission." "Not suicide," corrected a new voice from behind them. They turned to see General Marcus Webb approaching, his heavy footsteps echoing on the deck plating. The human had been granted access to the flagship's command center as part of the operational agreement. "Sacrifice. There's a difference." Admiral Zexthara's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Explain." Webb moved to the tactical display, his cybernetic hand interfacing directly with the human-modified controls. "Suicide implies waste, throwing life away for no purpose. Sacrifice means trading something precious for something more precious." The display lit up with ship positions and tactical data. "Every human ship out there represents families, communities, entire cultures. But those crews understand that if we lose here, those families and cultures die anyway." "But surely not every vessel is combat-capable," Yulrath protested. "That cargo hauler there, what possible military function could it serve?" Webb's smile was grim. "Commander, you're still thinking like a civilized being. That cargo hauler has been loaded with high-yield antimatter charges and fitted with automated guidance systems. Its job isn't to fight the Devourers. Its job is to ram into the biggest one it can find and take it with it." The casual way he said it sent chills through both alien officers. This wasn't desperate improvisation. It was calculated, methodical preparation for absolute warfare. Dr. Elena Vasquez appeared on the command deck via hologram from her position aboard the human command ship, the UES Retribution. "Admiral Zexthara, we're ready to begin integrating our forces with yours." "Integration?" Zexthara asked. "I was under the impression that humanity would be taking operational command." "We are," Vasquez confirmed. "But we need your ships to survive long enough to get ours into position. Think of this as a combined operation where humans provide the tactics and alien forces provide the initial buffer." The tactical briefing that followed was unlike anything Admiral Zexthara had experienced in her 3 centuries of service. Human military doctrine wasn't just different from galactic norms. It was antithetical to everything the galaxy understood about warfare. "Conventional galactic strategy focuses on force preservation," General Webb explained to the assembled fleet commanders. "You engage at maximum range, use superior technology and coordination to achieve victory with minimal losses. This works perfectly when fighting other civilized species with similar values." The holographic display showed dozens of previous battles between Council forces, all following predictable patterns of engagement, maneuver, and resolution. "The Devourers don't follow these patterns because they don't share these values," Webb continued. "They don't care about casualties. They don't worry about logistics or supply lines. They don't have non-combatants to protect or infrastructure to preserve. They are the perfect enemy, no weaknesses we can exploit using conventional thinking." Ambassador Chen took over the briefing. "So we stopped thinking conventionally. Human history is full of examples where a smaller force defeated a larger one by refusing to fight by the expected rules." New displays appeared showing human historical battles: Thermopylae, where 300 Spartans held off thousands; Rorke's Drift, where a handful of soldiers held a position against overwhelming odds; the Warsaw Ghetto, where civilians with improvised weapons fought trained soldiers. "But those were all defensive actions," protested Captain Velkoth of the Hegemony Fleet, "and most resulted in the destruction of the defending force." "Exactly," Webb replied. "They were calculated sacrifices that achieved strategic objectives. The 300 Spartans at Thermopylae didn't expect to survive, but their sacrifice bought time for their civilization to prepare. Sometimes the most effective strategy is to make the enemy pay such a high price for victory that they reconsider whether the objective is worth the cost." Dr. Vasquez activated a new set of displays showing human ship modifications. "We've spent the last 18 hours retrofitting our vessels for this specific type of engagement. Our philosophy is simple. Every ship will inflict maximum damage before it's destroyed, and some ships exist solely to be destroyed in the most damaging way possible." The alien commanders studied the schematics with growing alarm. Human ships had been stripped of non-essential systems and loaded with additional weapons, armor, and explosives. Life support had been reduced to minimum levels, artificial gravity disabled to save power for weapons, crew quarters converted to ammunition storage. "You've turned your ships into bombs," observed Admiral Karthek of the Centauri Remnant, his aquatic features rippling with distress. "Some of them, yes," Webb confirmed without hesitation. "Others we've turned into mobile weapons platforms designed to operate with skeleton crews. A few we've converted into pure ramming vessels, no weapons at all, just reinforced hulls, overcharged engines, and enough antimatter to crack a moon." "This is madness," whispered Captain Thesara. "No civilized species fights like this." "No civilized species survives fights like this," corrected Dr. Vasquez. "Civilization is a luxury, Captain. When your enemy wants to destroy everything you've ever loved, everything you've ever built, everything you've ever been, you put civilization aside and remember what you were before you became civilized." Admiral Zexthara found herself studying the human faces around her. These beings who had seemed so unremarkable 50 years ago had transformed into something she barely recognized. There was a hardness to them now, a focus that spoke of absolute commitment. "What do you need from our forces?" she asked. "Three things," General Webb replied, holding up fingers. "First, we need your long-range vessels to engage the Devourers at maximum distance and draw them into the system. Don't try to win, just hurt them enough to make them angry." "Make them angry?" Commander Yulrath questioned. "Angry enemies make mistakes," Dr. Vasquez explained. "The Devourers have been winning through careful, methodical advances. If we can provoke them into a headlong rush, they'll be off balance when they encounter our real defenses." "Second," Webb continued, "we need your fastest ships to act as bait once they're in system. Lead them through our prepared kill zones, but don't try to engage directly. Your job is to survive long enough to bring them where we want them." "And the third requirement?" Admiral Zexthara asked, though she was beginning to suspect she wouldn't like the answer. Webb's expression grew even more serious. "When things go bad, and they will go bad, we need you to resist every instinct your civilized minds possess. We're going to do things that will horrify you. We're going to sacrifice ships and crews in ways that will seem wasteful and brutal. We're going to turn this battle into something that will give you nightmares for the rest of your lives." The command deck fell silent. "We need you to trust us," Ambassador Chen added softly. "Not because we're smarter or more advanced, but because we're the only species in this room that understands what it means to fight for extinction. We've done it before many times. We fought our own planet, our own biology, our own nature. We fought wars where the only choices were victory or the complete annihilation of everything we were." Dr. Vasquez brought up a final display, not technical schematics or tactical plans, but images from Earth. Cities destroyed and rebuilt dozens of times. Monuments to wars that had claimed hundreds of millions of lives. Memorials to conflicts so devastating they had reshaped human civilization. "Every other species in the galaxy achieved spaceflight after achieving peace," Vasquez said. "Humans achieved spaceflight to escape from a world we had made too dangerous to live on. We didn't explore the stars seeking knowledge or resources or new homes. We explored the stars because we had made our own world uninhabitable with our wars." The alien commanders stared at the images in stunned silence. They showed a species that had survived not one but dozens of near-extinction events, most of them self-inflicted. Wars with chemical weapons, biological weapons, nuclear weapons. Conflicts fought not just for territory or resources, but for ideologies, for religious beliefs, for concepts so abstract that other species couldn't understand why anyone would die for them. "This is what you're unleashing," Admiral Zexthara said slowly. "This is what you're bringing to our galaxy." "We're not bringing it," Webb replied. "It's already here. The Devourers brought total war to your peaceful galaxy. We're just showing you what total war actually looks like when waged by experts." The klaxons began sounding before anyone could respond. The Devourers had arrived. Long-range sensors detected them first, a swarm of organic ships emerging from hyperspace at the system's edge. Hundreds of vessels, each one a living nightmare of twisted biomechanical design. They moved with purpose and coordination that spoke of a hive intelligence directing their actions. "All ships to battle stations," Admiral Zexthara commanded, her voice carrying across the fleet communication network. Council forces implement Plan Gamma long-range engagement, fighting withdrawal to Grid 7. Human forces, this is General Webb, came the transmission from the UES Retribution. All ships confirm ready status. Remember, we're not trying to win the first engagement. We're trying to teach these things that fighting us is going to hurt. The first phase of the battle began at maximum weapons range. Council ships opened fire with their most powerful weapons: particle beams, quantum torpedoes, antimatter missiles. The barrage was precisely coordinated, targeting the largest Devourer vessels with overlapping fields of fire that should have been devastating. It was barely effective. The Devourer ships absorbed most of the energy weapons, their hulls rippling and adapting to disperse the damage. The projectile weapons were intercepted by defensive systems that seemed to grow from the ships themselves, organic tendrils that reached out to swat missiles from space like insects. "They're adapting faster than our tactical models predicted," reported Commander Yulrath. "Expected," Webb's voice came back calmly. "Council forces, begin your withdrawal. Human first wave, you're cleared for engagement." What happened next defied every principle of space warfare that the galaxy understood. Instead of maintaining range and using their superior technology, 50 human ships accelerated directly toward the Devourer fleet. No evasive maneuvers, no attempt at tactical coordination, just a straight charge into the teeth of the enemy formation. "They're committing suicide," breathed Captain Velkoth. "No," Admiral Zexthara realized with growing horror. "They're being bait." The human ships opened fire as they closed range, but their weapons were different from anything the Council forces used. Instead of precise, efficient energy beams, they unleashed torrents of kinetic projectiles, tungsten slugs, accelerated to significant fractions of the speed of light, nuclear warheads, and stranger things that defied easy classification. But the real shock came when the first human ship was hit. Instead of attempting to withdraw or seek assistance, it continued its attack run even as its hull was breached and atmosphere vented into space. Internal explosions lit up its structure like a deadly constellation, but still it kept firing, kept accelerating toward its target. "Hull breach on the UES Yorktown," came a report from the human fleet. "Casualties in sections 4 through 7. "Acknowledged, Yorktown," Webb responded. "Continue your attack run." "Affirmative, Yorktown continuing to target. We're going to ram if weapons fail." The casual acceptance of death in those transmissions sent chills through every alien observer. This wasn't desperate bravery. It was calculated, methodical sacrifice in service of a greater strategy. The first human ship to die took 3 Devourer vessels with it. The UES Yorktown, her weapons systems finally failing, used her remaining engine power to ram the largest enemy ship in range. The explosion when her overloaded antimatter core breached was visible from the outer system. "One down, 49 to go," came Webb's voice, as calm as if he were discussing the weather. "Second wave, you're cleared for approach. Remember, we want them angry enough to follow us deep into the system." And incredibly, impossibly, it was working. The Devourers, who had methodically crushed every previous opponent, were being drawn into an increasingly chaotic pursuit. They were adapting to human weapons and tactics, but they couldn't adapt to the sheer, insane willingness of human crews to die taking their enemies with them. Admiral Zexthara watched her tactical display in fascination and horror as the battle developed. The humans were doing exactly what they had promised, turning the engagement into something that would give her nightmares for the rest of her life. And for the first time since the Devourers had appeared, she believed they might actually have a chance. The chase through Proxima Prima's inner system became a running battle unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. The humans retreated in stages, each withdrawal carefully planned to draw the Devourers deeper into increasingly elaborate traps. Admiral Zexthara watched from her command position as human tactics revealed themselves layer by layer. What had initially appeared to be suicidal charges were actually complex psychological warfare operations designed to manipulate an enemy that the rest of the galaxy had thought was unmanipulable. "They're making the Devourers feel superior," she realized aloud as another wave of human ships seemed to barely escape destruction. "Every engagement looks like a human defeat, but each one costs the enemy more than they expect." Dr. Vasquez's voice crackled through the communication system from her position aboard the UES Retribution. "Admiral, You're beginning to understand. The Devourers have been winning through overwhelming force and perfect adaptation. But they've never faced an enemy that deliberately appears weak while setting up for a killing blow. On the tactical display, the human fleet continued its apparently desperate retreat toward Proxima Prima's fourth planet, a massive gas giant with 17 moons. The Devourers followed in what seemed like perfect formation, their organic ships rippling with confidence as they closed the distance. Human tactics are based on a simple principle, General Webb explained during a brief lull in the fighting. Never let your enemy know how dangerous you really are until it's too late for them to escape. The retreat had been going on for 8 hours now, and the human losses were mounting. 73 ships destroyed, with their crews of thousands. Yet the human commanders spoke of these casualties with the same clinical detachment they might use to discuss ammunition expenditure. UES Phoenix is critical, reported Captain Sarah Kim from her dying ship. Primary power failing, weapons offline, but I've got a clean ramming solution on that big one with the spine clusters. Negative, Phoenix, came Webb's response. Break off and proceed to Rally Point 7. We need you for the next phase. Sir, we won't make it to Rally Point 7, but we can take that thing with us. Captain Kim, I'm ordering you to break off. Your crew has done enough. With respect, General, no we haven't. Phoenix out. Admiral Zexthara watched in stunned silence as the Phoenix, already gutted by enemy fire, used its remaining engine power to accelerate toward the largest Devourer vessel in the pursuing fleet. The organic ship tried to evade, but the human vessel's final course correction put it on an unavoidable collision trajectory. The explosion when both ships' cores breached simultaneously lit up space for hundreds of thousands of kilometers. When the energy surge faded, both vessels were gone, along with whatever crew and consciousness had been aboard the Devourer ship. That's what we're fighting, Commander Yulrath said quietly. Not the humans, that thing that drives them to choose death over defeat. It's not a thing, observed Dr. Vasquez, who had apparently been monitoring their communications. It's an idea. The idea that some things are worth dying for and some things are worth killing for, and sometimes those two things are the same thing. The running battle reached its crescendo as the human fleet approached the gas giant's moon system. This was where Admiral Zexthara finally began to understand the true scope of human planning. The moons weren't just celestial bodies, they were weapons. Over the past 18 hours, human engineering teams had been working around the clock to hollow out 3 of the smaller moons and fill them with antimatter charges. Not small tactical warheads, but strategic weapons capable of cracking planets. The humans had turned entire moons into bombs. You've militarized a solar system, Admiral Zexthara breathed. We've turned it into a kill zone, Webb corrected. Every piece of debris, every asteroid, every moon, they're all weapons now. This isn't a battle, Admiral, it's an execution. The Devourers entered the moon system in pursuit of what they believed was a broken, fleeing enemy. Their organic ships spread out in a search pattern, confident in their ability to adapt to whatever final desperate gambit the humans might attempt. They were wrong. The first surprise was the asteroids. What the Devourers had assumed were natural debris fields were actually carefully positioned weapons platforms. Human engineers had hollowed out hundreds of asteroids and filled them with automated weapons systems and self-destruct charges. As the Devourer fleet moved through what they thought was empty space, the asteroids came alive with weapons fire. But these weren't normal weapons. The humans had studied every previous engagement with the Devourers and identified exactly what types of damage their adaptive hulls couldn't absorb. Quantum disruptors that targeted the molecular bonds holding their ships together. Temporal mines that created localized time distortions. Gravity bombs that crushed ships by artificially increasing local gravitational fields by factors of thousands. The Devourers are trying to adapt, reported the Velkari science officer monitoring the engagement. But the humans are hitting them with too many different attack vectors simultaneously. That's the idea, Dr. Vasquez confirmed. You can't adapt to everything at once, especially when some of the weapons are specifically designed to prevent adaptation. The Devourer fleet found itself caught in a 3-dimensional maze of deadly surprises. Every time they moved to avoid one threat, they encountered another. Their perfect coordination began to break down as individual ships tried different adaptive strategies, only to discover that the humans had anticipated each one. But the real nightmare began when the humans activated their final weapon. The gas giant itself had been turned into a weapon. Human ships had been dumping exotic matter into its atmosphere for hours, creating an unstable reaction that was now reaching critical mass. The planet's entire atmosphere was becoming a fusion bomb measured not in kilotons or megatons, but in planetary masses. "You're going to destroy the entire system," Admiral Zexthara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If that's what it takes," Webb replied without hesitation. "We told you we'd make them pay a price they'd never forget." The chain reaction began in the gas giant's core and spread outward at a significant fraction of the speed of light. The planet's death throes created gravitational waves that tore at the fabric of space-time itself. The Devourer ships found themselves caught between the exploding planet and the weaponized moons, with human forces closing in from all sides. It was then that the true nature of human tactical thinking revealed itself. This wasn't just about winning the battle. It was about sending a message to every other Devourer fleet in the galaxy. "All human ships, this is General Webb. Final phase protocols are now in effect. Remember, we're not just fighting for Proxima Prima. We're fighting for every world these things might threaten in the future." The remaining human ships, fewer than 60 vessels out of the original 237, began their final assault. But these weren't desperate last stands. They were precisely coordinated strikes designed to achieve maximum psychological impact. Human ships rammed Devourer vessels at carefully calculated angles to create the most spectacular explosions possible. Human weapons targeted specific parts of enemy ships to cause them to die slowly and visibly rather than quickly and efficiently. Every death was designed to be a lesson. "They're not just trying to kill the Devourers," realized Commander Yulrath. "They're trying to traumatize them." "Trauma is a powerful teacher," Dr. Vasquez confirmed. "The Devourers think of themselves as the ultimate predators. We're showing them what it feels like to be prey." The battle reached its climax when the UES Retribution, General Webb's flagship, found itself surrounded by 7 Devourer ships. The human vessel was heavily damaged, her weapons largely offline, her crew compartments breached in a dozen places. "Retribution to all ships," came Webb's final transmission. "We're going to show these things what humans do when there's no way out." What happened next became legend throughout the galaxy. The Retribution didn't try to escape or negotiate. Instead, Webb ordered his ship to ram the largest Devourer vessel while simultaneously detonating every remaining weapon in their arsenal. But more than that, he opened a communication channel to the enemy ships and began speaking. Not pleading for mercy or demanding surrender, speaking in the calm, measured tones of a teacher delivering a lesson. "Listen carefully," Webb's voice carried across space to every ship in the system, human and alien alike. "We are humanity. We are the species that survived ice ages and asteroid impacts. We are the children of a world that tried to kill us from the moment we first drew breath. We have fought ourselves, our planet, our own biology, and everything else the universe could throw at us." The Retribution's hull began to buckle under enemy fire, but Webb continued speaking. "We do not surrender, we do not retreat. We do not compromise when the survival of our pack is at stake. You have threatened our pack, you have made this personal." The ship's superstructure was failing now, atmosphere venting, but the transmission continued. "We want you to remember this moment. We want you to remember that humans will burn down the universe before we let you hurt the people we've adopted as family. We want you to remember that crossing us means war to the knife, and war to the knife means one of us stops existing." The Retribution exploded with such force that it took 3 Devourer ships with it and damaged the others beyond their ability to adapt. But the transmission kept going, broadcast from relay stations the humans had hidden throughout the system. "Tell your masters, tell your swarm minds, tell whatever passes for your leaders. If you want to fight humanity, then fight humanity. But leave our friends alone, because if you harm them, we will hunt you to the edge of the galaxy and beyond. We will turn every star system into a weapon. We will make space itself into our ally." The surviving human ships continued their assault with renewed fury, each crew member inspired by their commander's sacrifice. They fought with the desperate courage of beings who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. "This is Captain Martinez of the UES Indomitable," came a new voice over the communications. "General Webb is gone, but his orders stand. All ships implement Protocol Omega. Protocol Omega, Admiral Zexthara would later learn, was the human term for victory or extinction, no middle ground. The remaining human ships abandoned all pretense of self-preservation and became pure weapons of war. The battle lasted another 4 hours. When it ended, only 18 human ships remained operational out of the original fleet of 237. But of the 400 Devourer vessels that had entered the system, none survived. The silence that followed was deafening. Admiral Zexthara found herself staring at a tactical display that showed a solar system transformed into a graveyard. The gas giant was gone, replaced by an expanding cloud of superheated plasma. 3 moons had been completely destroyed. The space between the remaining celestial bodies was littered with debris from over 600 ships. "Status report," she said quietly. "The Devourer fleet has been completely eliminated," reported her tactical officer. "Human casualties, extensive." The numbers were staggering. Over 40,000 human military personnel had died in the battle. Entire bloodlines, entire cultures from the human colonies had been wiped out in a single engagement. Yet when Admiral Zexthara looked at the faces of the surviving human crews on her communications screen, she saw not grief but grim satisfaction. "Phase 1 complete," announced Dr. Vasquez from her position aboard one of the surviving ships. "Proceeding to Phase 2. "Phase 2, Admiral Zexthara asked. Dr. Vasquez's smile was as cold as the space around them, making sure the rest of the Devourer fleets get the message. The aftermath of the Battle of Proxima Prima sent shockwaves through the galaxy that went far beyond mere military implications. Within hours of the engagement's conclusion, long-range sensors across Council space detected something unprecedented. Devourer fleets had stopped their advance. For the first time since their arrival from beyond the galactic rim, the unstoppable swarm had paused. Their coordinated advance toward the core worlds had halted completely, with individual fleets holding position at the edge of systems they had been preparing to assault. Admiral Zexthara stood in the emergency council chamber aboard the diplomatic vessel Convergence, watching as representatives from 57 species struggled to process what they had witnessed. The holographic recordings of the battle played on endless loops, each viewing revealing new details of human tactical doctrine that challenged everything the galaxy thought it understood about warfare. "The psychological impact appears to be propagating through their collective consciousness," reported Dr. Thesara of the Serpentine Alliance, her scaled features reflecting the blue glow of her analysis displays. "Our xenobiological teams have detected massive fluctuations in the electromagnetic signatures associated with Devourer hive mind communications." Ambassador Chen, one of only 3 human representatives to survive the battle, stood at the center of the chamber. Her uniform was torn and stained, her left arm in a medical support brace, but her voice was steady as she addressed the assembly. "The pause won't last forever," she warned. "The Devourers are adapting just like they always do, but right now they're trying to understand what happened here. They're trying to figure out how prey became predator." High Counselor Velmoth's ancient energy field flickered with what might have been uncertainty. "The cost was extraordinary. Your species has lost nearly 70% of its military capacity." "Our military capacity was never the real weapon," Chen replied. "What we've lost can be rebuilt. What we've gained is something else entirely." The tactical displays shifted to show new data long-range intelligence gathered from across the galaxy. The Devourer fleets weren't just pausing, they were consolidating. Ships that had been spread across dozens of star systems were pulling back into massive formations, clearly preparing for something unprecedented. "They're scared," observed Captain Morden of the Altarian Republic, his blue-scaled features etched with amazement. "For the first time since they arrived, they're actually afraid of something." "Fear is a teacher," Dr. Vasquez confirmed from her position aboard the UES Determination, one of the 18 surviving human vessels. "And we're about to give them a graduate-level education." The human strategy, Admiral Zexthara was beginning to understand, had never been limited to a single battle. The destruction of the Devourer fleet at Proxima Prima was just the opening move in a campaign designed to target something far more fundamental than ships or territory. Humanity was waging war against the very concept of Devourer supremacy. Phase 2 involves something we call aggressive diplomacy, Dr. Vasquez explained to the assembled commanders. We're going to make contact with the Devourer leadership directly. The chamber fell silent. Direct communication with the Devourers had been attempted dozens of times by various council species. Every effort had been ignored or resulted in the immediate destruction of the attempting vessel. They don't negotiate, protested Ambassador Clichter of the Hegemony, her compound eyes reflecting confusion. They don't even acknowledge communication attempts. They will now, Ambassador Chen replied with certainty. Because we're not going to ask them to negotiate, we're going to demand that they listen. The human plan, when it was fully revealed, was even more audacious than their military tactics. They proposed to take the surviving human fleet directly into Devourer-controlled space and force a confrontation with whatever served as the swarm's command structure. This is insanity, declared Councillor Vexini of the Quantum Collective. You're proposing to attack the enemy in their stronghold with fewer than 20 ships. We're not proposing to attack them, Dr. Vasquez corrected. We're proposing to terrify them. The human strategy relied on a principle that no other galactic species had ever considered. Sometimes the most effective way to deal with an overwhelming enemy was to convince them that you were completely insane. Human military history is full of examples where vastly outnumbered forces achieved victory through sheer audacity, Chen explained. Alexander the Great, Hannibal, Joan of Arc, Admiral Yi Sun Sin. They won not because they had superior forces, but because they did things their enemies thought were impossible. The plan they outlined was certainly impossible by any rational standard. The 18 surviving human ships would penetrate deep into Devourer space, locate the largest concentration of enemy forces, and challenge them to single combat. Not fleet against fleet, but ship against ship, crew against crew, in a series of duels designed to maximize the psychological impact on the Devourer collective consciousness. You're volunteering for execution, Admiral Zexthara said bluntly. We're volunteering to become legend, Chen replied. Every culture in the galaxy has stories about heroes who stood alone against impossible odds. We're going to become one of those stories, and we're going to make sure the Devourers never forget it. But the humans had one more surprise. They weren't planning to face the Devourers alone. We're requesting volunteers, Dr. Vasquez announced. Not for battle, we'll handle the fighting. We need witnesses, representatives from every council species who can observe what happens and carry the story back to their people. The request was unprecedented. Humans were asking alien observers to accompany them on what amounted to a suicide mission, not to fight, but to watch them die with sufficient drama to inspire the galaxy for generations. Why, asked Admiral Zexthara, what purpose does it serve to have us watch you be destroyed? Chen's smile was sad but determined. Because someone needs to remember what happened here. Someone needs to tell the story of the day humanity looked at the greatest threat the galaxy had ever faced and said, "No, you move." The volunteers came from every species in the council. Not many from each the humans had made it clear that this was extremely dangerous, but enough to ensure that every major civilization would have first-hand witnesses to whatever was about to happen. Admiral Zexthara found herself among the volunteers, though she couldn't entirely explain why. Perhaps it was professional curiosity. Perhaps it was the need to understand these humans who had so completely redefined her understanding of warfare. Or perhaps it was something simpler, the recognition that she was witnessing something unique in galactic history. The combined fleet departed for Devourer space 3 days after the Battle of Proxima Prima. 18 human warships and 12 alien observer vessels, heading directly toward the largest concentration of enemy forces yet detected. The journey took 6 days through hyperspace, and Admiral Zexthara spent most of it trying to understand the humans she was traveling with. These beings who had just sacrificed most of their civilization for strangers, who spoke of death and destruction with casual expertise, who planned their own heroic endings with the same methodical precision other species used for trade negotiations. She found them in the ship's Memorial Bay, a section that had been hastily converted to honor the crews lost at Proxima Prima. Holographic displays showed the faces and names of over 40,000 human beings who had died in the battle, but there was no sense of mourning or defeat in the survivors who visited the memorial. "You're not grieving," she observed to Dr. Vasquez during one of these visits. "We're not done yet," Vasquez replied. "Grief is for when the war is over. Right now, we're still fighting." "Fighting for what? Your species has already paid a higher cost than any other in this war." Dr. Vasquez gestured to the holographic faces surrounding them. "Fighting to make their sacrifice meaningful. Every person here chose to die so that the people they loved could live. If we give up now, if we let the Devourers recover from what we did to them, then they died for nothing." Admiral Zexthara studied the memorial displays more carefully. The humans hadn't just recorded names and service records. They had documented families, children, art, poetry, music, dreams. Each casualty was presented not as a military statistic, but as a complete life with connections to other lives. "You carry them with you," she realized. "We carry them all," confirmed Captain Rodriguez of the UES Defiance. "Every human who has ever lived and died is part of what we bring to this fight. That's why the Devourers can't really defeat us. They can destroy our ships and kill our bodies, but they can't kill the sum total of human experience." The fleet reached Devourer space on the 7th day, and what they found there defied expectation. The enemy hadn't been idle during their pause. They had constructed something that could only be described as a fortress in space, a massive structure built from the merged hulls of thousands of Devourer ships, pulsing with organic energy and bristling with weapons. "Scale of the structure is approximately 400 kilometers in length," reported the sensor officer aboard Admiral Zexthara's observation ship. "Mass equivalent to a small moon. Energy signatures suggest it contains the consciousness matrices of several million individual Devourers." "They built it for us," Dr. Vasquez said with satisfaction. "They're trying to show us how powerful they are, how futile our resistance is." "And they're about to learn," added Ambassador Chen, "that humans have a very specific response to displays of overwhelming power." The human fleet arranged itself in a formation that Admiral Zexthara initially thought was purely ceremonial, a perfect line, with each ship precisely spaced. It wasn't until she studied their power signatures that she realized what they were actually doing. They were linking their ships together into a single massive weapon system. "All human vessels, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the UES Humanity's Will," came the transmission that was broadcast on all frequencies, including those the Devourers used for communication. "I am speaking to whatever leads the species that calls itself the Devourers." The response was immediate, a cacophony of alien thoughts and concepts that the translation systems could barely process. Rage, confusion, and something that might have been fear echoed across space. "We know you can understand us," Chen continued, her voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who had already accepted death. "We know you've been studying our species since you arrived in our galaxy. We know you think you understand what we are." The human ships began moving toward the Devourer fortress, not in an attack formation, but in something far more disturbing, a procession. Like mourners walking to a funeral or priests approaching an altar. "You're wrong," Chen's voice continued. "You think we're just another galactic species. You think we're civilization that can be broken and consumed. You think that because you've destroyed our ships and killed our people, you've won." The alien observer ships followed at a carefully calculated distance, close enough to witness everything, but far enough away to survive what was coming next. "We are not civilization," Ambassador Chen announced to the galaxy and the Devourers alike. "Civilization is what we built to contain what we really are. Civilization is the cage we put around our true nature because we learned that our true nature was too dangerous for anyone's good." The human ships reached weapons range of the fortress and stopped. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, each human vessel began powering down its weapon systems. "What are they doing?" Admiral Zexthara breathed. Dr. Vasquez's voice came through the communication link, and for the first time since the crisis began, she sounded almost happy. "We're showing them what humans do when someone threatens our pack." The human ships opened their airlocks and began disgorging their crews into space, not abandoning ship, but preparing for something that made no tactical sense whatsoever. Admiral Zexthara watched in stunned silence as thousands of human beings in spacesuits began flying toward the Devourer fortress using nothing but personal maneuvering units and absolute determination. They were going to board the enemy structure. 18 ships carrying fewer than 5,000 humans were going to assault a fortress containing millions of Devourers. And from the way they moved, With purpose and coordination that spoke of extensive planning, it was clear they expected to win. What followed was not a battle in any sense that the galaxy understood. It was something far more primal, far more terrifying, and far more absolute. Admiral Zexthara watched through her ship's sensors as 5,000 humans in spacesuits flew across the void toward a fortress containing millions of enemies. Each human carried only what they could fit in a personal equipment, pack handheld weapons, cutting tools, explosives, and other instruments that seemed pathetically inadequate for assaulting something the size of a small moon. "Sensor analysis complete," reported her tactical officer, his voice tight with disbelief. "The humans are carrying primitive weapons, chemical explosives, kinetic projectiles, molecular cutting tools, nothing that could meaningfully damage a structure of that magnitude." "They're not trying to damage the structure." Dr. Vasquez's voice came through the communication link from her position with the boarding parties. "They're trying to damage the minds inside it." The first wave of humans reached the fortress's hull and began cutting their way inside. What happened next challenged everything the Galactic Council understood about both warfare and xenobiology. The Devourers inside the fortress began to scream. It wasn't audible screaming. Their species didn't use sound for communication. But their collective consciousness began broadcasting terror, confusion, and something that could only be described as existential horror across every frequency they used for thought sharing. "What are your people doing to them?" Admiral Zexthara demanded. "Nothing yet," Dr. Vasquez replied calmly as she cut through another bulkhead. "That's just their reaction to realizing that we're actually here. They spent so much time studying us from a distance that they never considered what it would be like to have humans in close quarters." The truth of what was happening became clear as the human boarding parties penetrated deeper into the fortress. The Devourers were a hive-mind species that had evolved in the vast emptiness between galaxies. They were perfectly adapted for coordinated warfare across vast distances, but they had never encountered an enemy that fought at personal range. More than that, they had never encountered an enemy that fought with such focused, intelligent hatred. Human combat doctrine at close range is fundamentally different from anything else in known space, Dr. Vasquez explained as she led her team through corridors that seemed to pulse with organic fear. "Most species fight to achieve objectives, capture territory, destroy weapons, eliminate leadership. Humans fight to kill the enemy and everything the enemy represents." The boarding action that followed was less a battle than a systematic psychological destruction of an entire species' sense of superiority. The humans didn't just attack Devourer defenders. They attacked Devourer concepts, Devourer beliefs, the very foundation of Devourer identity. "Every dead Devourer teaches the hive mind something new about human capabilities," Dr. Vasquez continued as her team encountered the first major concentration of defenders. "And what they're learning is that they made a fundamental mistake when they decided to threaten us." The fighting inside the fortress defied conventional tactical analysis. Human soldiers, outnumbered by ratios of hundreds to one, weren't just surviving against Devourer defenders, they were winning. Each engagement became a lesson in human adaptation, human creativity, human refusal to accept defeat even when defeat seemed mathematically inevitable. "They're using the fortress's own structure against its inhabitants," observed Commander Yulrath as he monitored the sensor readings. "Turning environmental systems into weapons, using ventilation shafts as mobility corridors, converting maintenance equipment into improvised explosives. That's because humans evolved on a planet that was actively trying to kill them," Dr. Vasquez explained between firefights. "We learned to turn every environmental hazard into a survival tool. To us, the enemy's fortress isn't a stronghold, it's just another hostile environment to be mastered and exploited." But the real transformation came when the human teams reached the fortress's central chamber and encountered the Devourer leadership cast directly. Admiral Zexthara watched through remote sensors as Ambassador Chen, Dr. Vasquez, and 30 other humans entered a vast organic chamber where dozens of massive Devourer entities floated in pools of bioelectric fluid. These were the minds that coordinated the swarm, the consciousness that had directed the conquest of entire star systems. They were terrified. The massive alien intelligences, each one capable of processing the thoughts of millions of individual Devourers, were broadcasting panic across their entire network. For the first time in their species' existence, they were facing something they couldn't understand, adapt to, or overcome through superior numbers or technology. "We are the leadership of the devouring swarm," one of the entities managed to communicate through the translation matrix. "We do not comprehend your purpose. Explain why you have come here to die." Ambassador Chen walked calmly into the center of the chamber, her space suit's life support systems the only sound in the vast organic cathedral. When she spoke, her voice was broadcast not just to the Devourer leadership, but to every ship in the surrounding space. "We haven't come here to die," she said simply. "We've come here to teach you something about the nature of prey and predator relationships." Dr. Vasquez moved to one of the control interfaces and began connecting her equipment to the Devourer systems. "You see, you made an assumption about humans based on your observations of other galactic species. You assumed we were like them, civilized, rational, predictable." The Devourer leadership tried to resist the intrusion into their systems, but human engineering teams had been studying their technology for months. Every adaptation the Devourers had made during previous battles had been carefully analyzed and countered. "We are not like them," Ambassador Chen continued. "We are the species that survived by being more dangerous than everything else on our planet. We are the children of a world where the only law was evolve or die, and we chose evolution." The human teams began uploading something into the Devourer systems, not a virus or weapon, but information. Massive databases of human history, human warfare, human capacity for violence and destruction, and absolute refusal to surrender. "We're showing you what you're really fighting," Dr. Vasquez explained as the upload continued. "Not a galactic civilization that values peace and order, but a species that has spent its entire existence perfecting the art of killing things that threaten its survival." The Devourer leadership entities began to convulse as the information flooded their consciousness. Images of human wars, human weapons, human willingness to sacrifice anything and everything for victory. But more than that, they were seeing the scope of human imagination when it came to violence. Nuclear weapons that could sterilize planets, biological weapons that could extinct entire species, chemical weapons that could poison atmospheres, kinetic weapons that could shatter moons, and stranger things, theoretical weapons that existed only in human imagination but could become reality given sufficient motivation. "This is our gift to you," Ambassador Chen said as the upload neared completion. "Complete knowledge of what humans are capable of when someone threatens the people they've decided to protect." But the real revelation came in the final files of the upload, not human capacity for violence, but human capacity for absolutely implacable hatred. The Devourer leadership saw the complete record of every species that had ever threatened humanity's survival. Species that had been not just defeated, but completely erased from existence. Ecosystems that had been not just conquered, but fundamentally restructured. Entire classifications of threats that had been not just overcome, but turned into tools for human advancement. "We don't just defeat our enemies," Dr. Vasquez added quietly. "We erase them so completely that the universe forgets they ever existed, and then we take everything they were and make it part of what we are." The psychological impact on the Devourer collective consciousness was immediate and devastating. These beings who had thought themselves the ultimate predators were discovering that they were not even close to the top of the food chain. "You have a choice," Ambassador Chen announced to the swarm leadership and through them to every Devourer consciousness in the galaxy. "You can leave our galaxy now, today, forever, or you can learn what happens when humans stop pretending to be civilized." The silence that followed was deafening. Across the entire fortress, millions of Devourer voices fell quiet as the species processed what they had learned. Finally, one of the leadership entities managed to communicate. "We do not understand. You could have shared this knowledge through diplomatic channels. Why did you come here? Why did you sacrifice so many of your own to deliver this message in person?" Dr. Vasquez's smile was visible even through her space suit's visor. "Because we wanted you to smell our breath when we said it." The withdrawal began within hours. Devourer fleets across the galaxy began retreating toward the galactic rim, their coordinated advance collapsing into a disorganized flight from human space. But they didn't just retreat, they broadcast warning signals, telling other Devourer swarms in distant galaxies about what they had encountered. The message that spread across the cosmic void was simple. There is a species in this galaxy that is more dangerous than we are. Do not approach. Do not engage. Do not threaten anything they consider theirs. Admiral Zexthara watched the great withdrawal from her observation post, trying to process what she had witnessed. In the span of 2 weeks, a species she had considered primitive had redefined the balance of power in the galaxy through the simple expedient of being absolutely, terrifyingly honest about what they were. "Why did you save us?" she asked Dr. Vasquez during the long journey home. "Your species could have used this crisis to establish dominance over the galaxy. You could have let the Devourers weaken the Council and then positioned yourselves as our saviors and masters." Dr. Vasquez looked out at the stars through the observation deck's viewport. "Because that's not what pack members do to each other. You accepted us into your civilization 50 years ago. That made you family. And humans will burn the universe down before we let anyone hurt our family. But the cost will be paid by volunteers," Dr. Vasquez assured her. "The 40,000 humans who died at Proxima Prima knew exactly what they were sacrificing and why. The 5,000 who boarded the Devourer Fortress knew they probably wouldn't survive to see the outcome. Every one of them chose that fate rather than let the galaxy fall." Admiral Zexthara thought about this for a long moment. "Your species truly is different from the rest of us." "Different, not better," Dr. Vasquez corrected. "We're the species that evolution shaped to be the galaxy's immune system. When something threatens the peace and order that civilized species have built, we activate. Not because we enjoy it, but because someone has to." The human fleet that returned to Proxima Prima consisted of 11 ships and fewer than 3,000 survivors. But their return marked the beginning of a new era in galactic history. The Devourers were gone, but their departure had revealed something about the galaxy's youngest member species that would reshape diplomatic, military, and philosophical thinking for generations. Humanity had revealed itself to be not just another member of galactic civilization, but its guardian. A species that would sacrifice everything to protect what they considered worth protecting, and capable of violence that other species could barely comprehend. But perhaps most importantly, they had proven that such power could coexist with restraint, honor, and genuine care for the welfare of others. The final report to the Galactic Council was brief but comprehensive. Humanity has demonstrated that they are capable of actions and sacrifices that exceed our previous understanding of warfare, loyalty, and species survival instincts. They have also demonstrated that these capabilities are guided by principles that align with galactic civilization's highest values. Recommendation: never forget what they did for us. Never take for granted what they are willing to do. Never give them reason to regret saving us. In the months that followed, as the galaxy slowly returned to normal, Admiral Zexthara often found herself looking up at the stars and remembering the lesson the humans had taught everyone. Sometimes the most civilized thing you can do is unleash the monster within you to protect the people you love. And sometimes the universe needs to be reminded that there are worse things than extinction. There are species willing to become those worse things rather than accept extinction. The stars no longer trembled when humanity walked among them. They trembled at the thought of what would happen if humanity ever decided to stop walking and start running. But perhaps most reassuringly of all, the humans themselves seemed perfectly content to keep walking, secure in the knowledge that their capacity for terrible things made their choice to do good things infinitely more meaningful. The galaxy was safe, not because the threats had been eliminated, but because it now had guardians who understood that some things were worth becoming monsters to protect. And for the first time in her long life, Admiral Zexthara slept soundly, knowing that humanity was watching the darkness beyond the stars.